Move, you crooked judge. This courtroom isn't your church, and that bench doesn't make you better than us. Officer Dale Rourke's fingers bit into Judge Evelyn Harper's shoulder hard enough to twist her sideways as Officer Brent Haskins clamped down on the other, hauling her up from the bench in front of her own packed courtroom. The cuffs clicked once, sharp and metallic, while Rourke leaned close, his breath hot with coffee and contempt. "Let's see how much attitude you have without your little wooden hammer," he said, loud enough for every lawyer, clerk, and defendant to hear. Evelyn's black robe bunched under their fists, her face calm even as the warrant Haskins waved shook with his own excitement. Around her, no one moved. Even the bailiff looked terrified to breathe. They thought they were parading a disgraced nobody out of court, never realizing they were laying hands on the one person who could bury them both. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The morning sun filtered through the tall courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the packed courtroom. Judge Evelyn Harper sat behind her bench, her black robe crisp and her posture perfect. Her dark eyes scanned the sea of faces before her. Anxious defendants, stern officers, and attentive lawyers all waiting for her ruling. The case had dragged on for weeks. Evidence of systematic unlawful detentions had piled up, painting a disturbing picture of police overreach. Now, the moment of judgment had arrived. This court has reviewed extensive evidence of constitutional violations, Evelyn began, her voice steady and clear. The pattern of detaining citizens without probable cause shows a troubling disregard for basic rights. She paused, noting how several uniformed officers in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Their discomfort didn't deter her. 20 years on the bench had taught her that justice required courage. Furthermore, the department's claim that these detentions were necessary for public safety is not supported by the facts. The data shows a clear bias in how these stops were conducted, with minority communities bearing the brunt of this misconduct. A muscle twitched in the police captain's jaw. His face had grown increasingly red as she spoke. Good. Let them squirm. The truth needed to be said. The evidence demonstrates that officers regularly exceeded their authority, holding citizens for hours without cause, denying them access to legal representation, and the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom crashed open with a bang that made everyone jump. Heads whipped around as officers Dale Rourke and Brent Haskins stormed down the center aisle. Their boots echoed against the marble floor, badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Evelyn's heart quickened, but her face remained impassive. She'd dealt with intimidation tactics before. "Officers, this court is in session. You will wait." "Save it," Rourke sneered, his voice carrying through the now silent room. He was a big man, using his size to project menace as he approached the bench. Haskins moved beside him, smaller but somehow more threatening in his cold calculation. The bailiff stepped forward uncertainly. "Officers, you can't." "We can, and we will," Haskins cut him off, pulling out a folded paper. "We have business here." Evelyn's hands gripped the edge of her bench. "Whatever business you have can wait until this court." "Your court?" Rourke's laugh was ugly. "That's rich. You don't get to hide behind that robe anymore, Your Honor." He spat the title like an insult. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Lawyers exchanged worried glances. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her stenotype, eyes wide with disbelief. "Officer Rourke," Evelyn said, keeping her voice level despite the growing knot in her stomach, "you are interrupting official proceedings and showing contempt for—" "Contempt?" Rourke's face twisted into a smirk. "That's funny coming from you. Stand up." "I will not." Evelyn's words rang out firm and clear. "This is my courtroom, and you are out of line." "Not anymore." Haskins moved to her left while Rourke took the right, their synchronized movements betraying careful planning. Your courtroom days are done. The gallery erupted in whispers. A few people stood up for a better view, while others edged toward the exits. The air grew thick with tension. "What you're doing is illegal," Evelyn stated, fighting to maintain her composure as they flanked her. "Step back now, or—" Rourke's hand clamped down on her shoulder, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. On her other side, Haskins grabbed her arm with equal force. "Or what?" Rourke sneered. "You'll hold us in contempt? Issue a warrant? Those days are over, Judge. Time to see how the other side lives." The bailiff finally found his voice. "Stop! You can't—" "We can," Haskins said smoothly, his grip tightening. "We have full authority." Shocked gasps filled the room as they began pulling Evelyn to her feet. Her robe twisted around her legs as she tried to maintain her dignity. The wooden bench scraped against the floor. "This is assault on a judge," someone called out. "Someone stop them!" But nobody moved. The other officers present stayed rooted in place, their faces carefully blank. The attorneys watched in stunned silence. Even the bailiff seemed paralyzed by the unprecedented scene unfolding before him. Evelyn's mind raced. This was coordinated, planned, not a rogue action, but something worse. An approved attack on judicial authority itself. She could feel the tremors of fear trying to take hold, but she refused to let them show. "Get your hands off me," she commanded, her voice carrying the weight of 2 decades on the bench. "This is a direct violation of—" "Save your speeches," Rourke growled, yanking her harder. "You're coming with us, and all your fancy words won't change that." The gallery erupted in chaos. People were standing now, phones raised to record the scene. The court reporter's fingers flew across her keyboard, capturing every word. But no one intervened as the officers manhandled a sitting judge in her own courtroom. Evelyn's feet barely touched the ground as they lifted her partly out of her chair. Her robe bunched awkwardly around her waist, but she kept her chin high. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear, even as her heart pounded against her ribs. "Look at her now," Rourke announced to the room, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Not so high and mighty without that bench to hide behind, are you?" The heavy silence shattered as Rourke jerked Evelyn fully to her feet. Her robe twisted around her legs, the fabric bunching awkwardly as she struggled to maintain her balance. Papers scattered from her bench, floating to the floor like broken wings. "Evelyn Harper," Rourke announced, his voice booming through the stunned courtroom, "you're under arrest for judicial obstruction and tampering with evidence." His lips curled into a satisfied sneer. "Guess you're not untouchable after all." A wave of shocked whispers rippled through the gallery. Phones raised higher, recording every moment of the unprecedented scene. The bailiff took another hesitant step forward, his hand hovering near his belt. "This is completely irregular," Evelyn stated, her voice steady despite the bruising grip on her arms. "I demand to see your warrant immediately." Haskins pulled a folded document from his jacket with his free hand, making a show of waving it in front of her face. "Right here, Your Honor." The mockery in his tone matched his partner's. "All nice and legal." "Read it," Evelyn commanded, refusing to flinch as Rourke's fingers dug deeper into her shoulder. "Oh, now you want to play by the rules?" Rourke laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. He shook her slightly, like a dog with a toy. "Where was that respect for procedure when you were throwing out our cases?" At her stenotype machine, Lydia Grant's experienced fingers never stopped moving, recording every word of the unfolding drama. Her eyes narrowed as she caught glimpses of the warrant Haskins held. Something about the formatting looked wrong. The header wasn't aligned properly, and the case number sequence seemed off. "I need to examine that document." The court clerk finally spoke up, finding her voice. She stepped forward, hand extended. "Sure thing," Haskins replied smoothly, holding out the warrant. But as the clerk reached for it, he pulled it back slightly. "Just remember, interfering with a lawful arrest is a serious offense." The clerk's hand wavered, uncertainty crossing her face. She glanced at the bailiff, who looked equally conflicted. Years of conditioning to respect police authority warred with their duty to protect the court's integrity. "The warrant is fraudulent," Evelyn stated firmly, her dark eyes scanning what she could see of the document. "The formatting alone violates standard procedure, and the case number sequence is incorrect." "Shut up," Rourke growled, giving her another rough shake. "You don't give the orders anymore." Lydia's fingers flew faster across her keys, capturing every word. She knew the importance of creating an accurate record, especially now. Her eyes caught more details, missing watermarks, irregular signatures. But before she could speak up, Rourke escalated. "That's enough talk," he announced. "Hands behind your back, Judge. Time to see how the other half lives." "This is assault on a judicial officer," Evelyn stated clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Everyone present is witnessing a criminal act." Rourke responded by wrenching her arms backward, making her gasp involuntarily. "Still trying to lecture us? Maybe these will help you understand your new position." The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the silent courtroom. "Stop this immediately!" A senior attorney stood up from the gallery. "This is completely inappropriate." "Sit down!" Haskins barked, his hand moving meaningfully to his weapon. "Unless you want to join her." The attorney sank back slowly, face flushed with shame. Others in the gallery shifted uncomfortably, averting their eyes from the spectacle before them. The weight of collective cowardice hung heavy in the air. The cold steel closed around Evelyn's wrists, digging into her skin. Her judicial robe bunched awkwardly behind her, the symbol of her authority now twisted and constrained. Still, she kept her head high, her voice steady. "Every person in this room," she proclaimed, meeting as many eyes as she could, "has a duty to report what they're witnessing. This is a direct attack on judicial independence." "Keep talking," Rourke sneered, yanking the chain so her shoulders strained. "It'll make great evidence at your trial." Lydia's fingers never stopped moving, capturing every word, every grunt, every rattle of the handcuffs. Her machine would remember what human courage had failed to confront. "The warrant," the clerk tried one more time, her voice smaller now. "We need to verify." "Here's your verification." Haskins cut her off, slapping the document onto her desk. "File it properly, unless you want us coming back for you next." The clerk's hands shook as she picked up the warrant, her eyes skimming the obvious irregularities, but her mouth staying firmly shut. Self-preservation won out over duty. "Start walking," Rourke commanded, shoving Evelyn forward. Her robe dragged on the ground, the hem catching under her feet. "Let's give everyone a good look at what happens to judges who don't know their place." Evelyn stumbled slightly but caught herself, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her fall. As they marched her toward the exit, she held her posture straight, her face composed. The gallery parted before them, people pressing back against the benches, as if corruption might be contagious. "Remember this moment," she said clearly, her words cutting through the tense silence. "Remember what you saw, what you heard, and what you failed to stop." "Always with the speeches," Rourke muttered, shoving her harder. "Keep moving." The handcuffs bit deeper as they forced her forward, her steps measured despite their pushing. In the space of minutes, they had stripped away her authority, her dignity, her freedom. But they couldn't take her composure, her truth, or her determination. With phones still recording and Lydia's stenotype still clicking, they dragged Judge Evelyn Harper toward the courtroom doors, leaving behind a room full of witnesses who would have to live with their silence. Lydia's fingers remained frozen over her stenotype as the heavy doors swung shut behind Judge Harper. The echo seemed to linger, like the final gong of a bell marking the end of something sacred. Through decades of court reporting, she documented thousands of cases, but never had she witnessed such a blatant violation of judicial authority. Her eyes dropped to her notes, scanning the details she'd captured about the warrant. The filing codes jumped out at her immediately. She'd processed enough court documents to recognize the inconsistencies. The prefix was wrong for their jurisdiction, and the numerical sequence didn't match the standard format used for judicial warrants. Even the date stamps were misaligned. "Back to work, everyone," the clerk announced weakly, shuffling papers on her desk without actually looking at them. "We have other cases on the docket." But nobody moved. The gallery remained frozen, witnesses to a crime they'd done nothing to stop. Lawyers whispered in clusters, their faces drawn with concern. Or was it fear? The bailiff stood rigid by his post, staring straight ahead, as if trying to convince himself he hadn't just watched two officers assault a judge. Lydia's fingers moved mechanically over her keys, adding more observations to her record. 20 years of muscle memory couldn't be interrupted, even by shock. She noted the exact time, the precise words used, the physical handling that went beyond any reasonable force needed for a legitimate arrest. Through the glass panels of the courtroom doors, she could see the growing crowd in the hallway. Court staff and attorneys gathered in small groups, their heads bent together in urgent conversation. Phones were out, no doubt spreading the news across social media already. Judge Harper's arrest would be viral before she even reached the police station. But something else caught Lydia's attention. Standing near the back wall, partially hidden by a support column, Chief Leonard Briggs observed the aftermath with cold calculation. His presence sent a chill down her spine. He hadn't moved during the entire incident, hadn't tried to stop his officers, hadn't shown any surprise at their actions. His face remained impassive, but his eyes held satisfaction. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a random act of police intimidation. The warrant's obvious flaws, the timing of the arrest, the chief's presence, it was orchestrated, planned. Someone wanted Judge Harper not just arrested, but humiliated in her own courtroom. "Ms. Grant?" The clerk's voice startled her. "We'll need a copy of today's transcript as soon as possible." Lydia nodded slowly, her hands steady despite the tremors in her chest. "Of course, I'll have it prepared." She didn't mention the irregularities she'd documented. The clerk's earlier silence told her everything she needed to know about where loyalties would fall. Around her, court staff began moving with exaggerated normalcy, as if trying to erase what they'd witnessed through sheer force of routine. Files were shuffled, calendars consulted, phones answered. But their movements had a mechanical quality, like actors who'd forgotten their true roles. Through the doors, she could still see Chief Briggs. He'd moved slightly, now speaking quietly with another officer. Their expressions were too controlled, too satisfied. Lydia's fingers added another note to her record. Chief Leonard Briggs present during entire incident. No intervention attempted. She watched as he finally turned to leave, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. The sound carried authority, control, power. It was the sound of a man who knew his plans were unfolding exactly as intended. The nausea rose in Lydia's throat. She'd seen enough corruption in her career to recognize its patterns, the careful orchestration, the public humiliation, the silent witnesses. It was all designed to send a message. Judge Harper's true crime wasn't whatever that fraudulent warrant claimed. It was daring to challenge police power from her bench. "We should probably clear the courtroom," the clerk announced, her voice still shaky. "Given the circumstances." The gallery began to empty, people filing out in uncomfortable silence. Some still had their phones out, replaying their recordings of the arrest. Others simply looked shell-shocked, as if they couldn't quite believe what they'd witnessed in a place meant to represent justice. Lydia's hands moved with practiced efficiency, saving her notes and creating multiple backup files. Each keystroke felt like an act of defiance, preserving truth while others tried to bury it. She noted how Officer Rourke had grabbed the judge's left shoulder first, how Officer Haskins had positioned himself to block the bailiff's path, how the warrant had been deliberately kept just out of clear view. Details mattered. Details could be the difference between justice and its perversion. With methodical care, she removed her backup drive and slipped it into her purse. Her primary files would go to official storage, but these copies, these would stay with her. She locked her stenotype case with slow, deliberate movements, each click of the latches echoing in the nearly empty courtroom. Rising from her station, Lydia gathered her belongings with the same efficiency she'd demonstrated for decades. But inside, her mind was racing. She knew what she'd seen. She knew what she'd documented. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that this was bigger than a single corrupt arrest. Looking around the courtroom one last time, she saw the scattered papers still lying where they'd fallen during the arrest. The judge's bench stood empty, the gavel abandoned mid-use. Everything about the scene felt wrong, distorted, like a painting that had been violently slashed. But Lydia had her records. Her fingers had captured every word, every action, every detail that others might conveniently forget. She held truth in her files, and no amount of power or intimidation could erase what she'd documented. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the police station's processing area, casting harsh shadows across Evelyn's face. Her judicial robe had been taken, leaving her in the simple black dress she'd worn underneath. 4 officers stood watching, their badges gleaming under the artificial light, as if to mock everything her own position once represented. "Hands on the counter." Officer Rourke's voice carried a smug satisfaction that made her stomach turn. When she didn't move fast enough, he stepped closer. "I said, 'Hands on the counter, Judge.'" He spat out her title like it was poison. Evelyn placed her palms flat on the cold metal surface, her movements deliberate and controlled. She'd sentenced countless criminals from her bench, but now found herself on the other side of the system she'd served for decades. The irony wasn't lost on her. "Name!" Officer Haskins stood at the computer, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. His tone was professional, almost bored, as if processing a judge was just another Tuesday morning task. "You know my name," Evelyn replied, her voice steady despite the anger burning in her chest. Rourke slammed his hand down beside hers, making the counter rattle. "Answer the question properly. You're not giving orders anymore." "Judge Evelyn Marie Harper," she said, each word precise and clear. She noticed how Rourke's jaw clenched at her use of her title. Good. The processing continued with mechanical efficiency. Date of birth, address, employment. Each question designed to reduce her to data points in their system. Haskins typed everything with methodical precision, while Rourke hovered too close, invading her space with his bulk. "Fingerprints next," Haskins announced, rolling his chair toward the fingerprinting station. "Right hand first." Evelyn watched as they pressed each of her fingers into the black ink pad. The substance felt oily against her skin, leaving marks that would stain long after they were done. She memorized every detail. Officer Thompson manning the camera, Officer Rivera by the door, the slight tremor in Haskins's left hand as he worked. "Make sure you get good prints," Rourke instructed, his breath hot against her ear. "Wouldn't want any mistakes in processing our high and mighty judge." "Step back, Officer Rourke," Evelyn said quietly. "Your intimidation tactics are unnecessary and unprofessional." He laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. "Still trying to give orders? Maybe you haven't noticed, but that robe doesn't protect you anymore. You're just another perp now." Haskins finished with her fingers and gestured toward the height chart on the wall. "Stand against the wall for your photo." Evelyn walked to the marked spot, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. She held her head high as Officer Thompson adjusted the camera. The flash burned her eyes, but she didn't blink. Click. Turn left. Click. Turn right. Click. Each photo documenting this orchestrated humiliation. "Smile for your mugshot," Rourke taunted. "I'm thinking of framing this one for my desk." Evelyn stared directly into the camera, her expression neutral, but her eyes blazing with defiance. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Let them take their photos. Let them fill out their forms. Every procedure they followed, every regulation they ignored. It was all evidence she stored away in her mind. "Personal items," Haskins called out, holding up a plastic bag. "Jewelry, watch, anything in your pockets." With steady hands, Evelyn removed her pearl earrings, a gift from her mother when she'd first been appointed to the bench. Her wedding ring, worn even years after James's death. The simple gold watch she'd used to keep time in her courtroom. Each item dropped into the bag with a small clink, like pieces of her identity being stripped away. "Check her for weapons," Rourke ordered, though they all knew it was unnecessary. She'd gone through courthouse security that morning, had been sitting on her bench when they'd arrested her. Officer Rivera stepped forward, a female officer at least, and performed the pat-down with professional detachment. Evelyn stood still, noting how Rourke watched with undisguised satisfaction. "She's clean," Rivera reported, stepping back. "Of course she is," Rourke sneered. "Judges don't get their hands dirty, do they? They just sit up high and pass judgment on real workers." Evelyn met his gaze. "Is there something you'd like to say directly, Officer Rourke, rather than these thinly veiled implications?" His face reddened. "Yeah, I got something to say. You've been a thorn in this department's side for too long. All those cases you ruled against us, all those times you took some scumbag's word over a cop's. Well, look where that got you. Are you admitting this arrest is retaliation for my judicial decisions?" Evelyn asked, her voice carrying the same calm authority she'd used in court. "Enough talking," Haskins cut in quickly, shooting Rourke a warning look. "Processing is complete. Time for holding." They led her down a narrow corridor, past rows of cells. Some were empty. Others held occupied forms hunched on metal benches. The air grew colder, heavy with the smell of industrial cleaner and stale sweat. Haskins unlocked a cell door while Rourke kept his hand clamped on Evelyn's arm. The space was small, maybe 6 by 8 feet, with a metal bench bolted to the wall and a stainless steel toilet in the corner. No privacy, no comfort, designed to remind occupants of their powerlessness. "Welcome to your new chambers," Rourke said, shoving her forward into the cell. "Hope it meets your honor's high standards." Evelyn caught herself against the bench, refusing to stumble. She turned to face them as the door swung shut with a heavy clang, the sound echoing off concrete walls. The lock engaged with a final, definitive click. The holding cell's metal bench pressed cold against Evelyn's back. She sat perfectly straight, her posture a habit from years on the bench, even as her mind raced through the morning's events. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting stark shadows across the concrete floor. Every detail of the arrest played on repeat in her thoughts. Rourke's thundering entrance, Haskins' calculated movements, the warrant that shouldn't exist. Her fingers traced the lingering stains from the fingerprint ink, dark smudges that marked her transformation from judge to defendant. The sound of voices echoed down the corridor, growing louder. Heavy footsteps approached, accompanied by the jangle of keys. "You can't deny her legal representation," a familiar voice boomed. "I don't care what internal procedures you're claiming." Malcolm Price. Evelyn felt a small measure of relief at the sound of her old colleague's voice. He'd always been a force of nature in the courtroom, and his presence now carried that same intensity. 5 minutes, a guard grumbled. That's all you get for now. Malcolm appeared at the cell door, his usual impeccable suit slightly rumpled, suggesting he'd rushed over. His dark eyes swept the cell, taking in every detail before settling on Evelyn. The guard unlocked the door, and Malcolm stepped inside. "They're saying you tampered with evidence," Malcolm said without preamble, his voice low and controlled. "Judicial obstruction. The media's already running with it." "The warrant was invalid," Evelyn replied, keeping her voice steady. "The filing numbers didn't match any legitimate court documents. Lydia Grant, my court reporter, noticed it immediately." Malcolm pulled out a small notebook, his pen moving quickly across the page. "Take me through it. Everything. From the beginning." "I was delivering my ruling on the Thompson case. Police misconduct, unlawful detention patterns." Evelyn closed her eyes, reconstructing the scene. Mid-sentence, Rourke and Haskins burst in. No warning, no proper procedure. They claimed to have a warrant. But Malcolm... She leaned forward slightly. That warrant shouldn't exist. There was no investigation, no probable cause. "They're claiming otherwise," Malcolm said, still writing. "Chief Briggs gave a statement an hour ago. Says they've been building a case against you for months, accusing you of systematically favoring defendants in police misconduct cases, suggesting you've been tampering with evidence to support your rulings." Evelyn's jaw tightened. Briggs was there, in the courtroom. He watched it happen. He knew. Of course he did. Malcolm stopped writing, meeting her eyes. "This isn't just about today's ruling, is it? This is about every case where you've stood up to department overreach. Every time you've ruled against them. They're trying to discredit your entire record." A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the small window in the cell door, they could see officers gathering around a break room television. The news was running footage of Evelyn being led out of the courthouse in handcuffs. "Breaking news," the reporter's voice carried faintly down the hallway. "Sources within the department suggest Judge Harper has shown increasingly erratic behavior in recent months, with multiple complaints filed regarding her conduct." "They're not wasting any time," Malcolm muttered, scribbling faster in his notebook. "They're painting you as unstable, biased, corrupt. Classic character assassination." "They've been planning this," Evelyn said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "The warrant, the media narrative, all of it. This isn't impulsive. This is coordinated." Malcolm nodded grimly. "The question is how far up it goes. Briggs is involved, obviously. But an operation this sophisticated—" He trailed off, adding more notes. "Time's up," the guard called, rattling his keys. Malcolm stood, straightening his tie. "I'm going to start digging. First priority is getting you out of here. Then we'll start dismantling their story piece by piece." He paused, studying her face. "You know they're not going to make this easy." "They never have," Evelyn replied. She thought of all the times she'd stood firm against police overreach, all the cases where she'd insisted on accountability. Each ruling had earned her enemies, created ripples through the department. Now those ripples had become a wave, crashing down on her with full force. "Malcolm," she said, as he turned to leave. "Lydia Grant. Find her. She saw everything, and she'll have records." He nodded sharply. "I'll start there. Hang tight, Evelyn." "This is just the beginning." The cell door clanged shut behind him, the sound reverberating off the concrete walls. Through the window, Evelyn could still see the television screen, now showing her official judicial portrait, alongside sensational headlines questioning her mental state and integrity. She watched the officers in the break room, their backs to her cell, nodding along with the news report. How many of them had appeared in her courtroom over the years? How many had she ruled against when evidence showed misconduct? How many had waited for this moment? The realization settled over her like a physical weight. This wasn't just about defending herself against false charges. This wasn't even about exposing a corrupt arrest. This was about confronting an entire system that had finally shown its true face, a system that would rather destroy a judge than face accountability. Evelyn straightened her spine, her hands folded in her lap just as they had been countless times on the bench. Let them think they had her cornered. Let them believe their badges and guns and media connections made them untouchable. She'd spent her career upholding justice in the face of power. She wouldn't stop now, even from inside a cell. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the police station's windows as news broadcasts flickered across every available screen. Footage of Evelyn's arrest played on an endless loop, each replay more sensational than the last. The cameras had caught her being led down the courthouse steps, her judicial robes disheveled, handcuffs glinting in the morning light. "Shocking developments today," the anchor's voice rang through the break room, as Judge Evelyn Harper was arrested in her own courtroom on charges of judicial misconduct and evidence tampering. Officers gathered around the television, some smirking, others nodding in apparent vindication. The footage cut to Chief Leonard Briggs, standing at a hastily assembled podium outside police headquarters. His silver hair caught the light, his uniform pressed, and medals gleaming. "The department takes these allegations very seriously," Briggs declared, his voice carrying the practiced gravity of authority. "We've been monitoring Judge Harper's concerning pattern of behavior for months. The evidence suggests a systematic bias against law enforcement, coupled with actions that compromise the integrity of our justice system." In her cramped office at the courthouse, Lydia Grant watched the same broadcast, her hands clenched into fists. 23 years she'd served as a court reporter, recording every word, every objection, every ruling. Now she watched as they twisted Evelyn's record into something unrecognizable. "Sources close to the investigation," another reporter intoned, "suggest Judge Harper has demonstrated increasingly erratic behavior, particularly in cases involving police conduct. Multiple officers have reportedly filed complaints about hostile treatment in her courtroom." Lydia's jaw tightened. She'd been present for every one of those cases. Evelyn hadn't been hostile. She'd been thorough, demanding evidence to support testimony, refusing to accept badge numbers as automatic proof of truth. Across town at the county records office, Malcolm Price faced another wall of resistance. "I'm sorry, sir," the clerk said, not looking particularly sorry at all. "Those files are currently under review." "Administrative hold." "Under whose authority?" Malcolm demanded, his tie loosened after hours of similar roadblocks. "Direct order from the police department. Ongoing investigation." The clerk shuffled papers, clearly dismissing him. Malcolm's phone buzzed, another news alert. He pulled it out to see Chief Briggs giving another statement, this time flanked by Officers Rourke and Haskins. "Officers Rourke and Haskins demonstrated tremendous courage today," Briggs was saying, resting a paternal hand on each officer's shoulder. "They put their duty to justice above professional courtesy. No one, regardless of their position, is above the law." Rourke nodded solemnly, playing the role of reluctant hero. Haskins maintained his usual controlled expression, but Malcolm caught the slight upturn at the corner of his mouth. Back in her office, Lydia switched off the television, unable to watch anymore. The narrative was being crafted with surgical precision, each broadcast adding another layer of doubt about Evelyn's character, her competence, her judgment. They were erasing years of principled rulings, replacing them with implications of instability and bias. She opened her bottom desk drawer, pulling out her personal stenographer's notebook. Unlike the official court records, which were already being reviewed, these pages contained her own detailed notes. Every session, every ruling, every interaction, documented in her precise shorthand. Her fingers traced today's entry. the warrant number that didn't match any legitimate filing, the exact times and sequence of events, the words Rourke had sneered as they grabbed Evelyn, details that were already being altered or omitted in official accounts. Another news alert chimed from her computer. A local station had dug up an old complaint filed against Evelyn by a police union representative, presenting it as evidence of a long-standing vendetta against law enforcement. They conveniently omitted that the complaint had been dismissed as baseless after investigation. Lydia thought of all the times she'd watched Evelyn work, methodically examining evidence, carefully weighing testimony, insisting on proper procedure even when it was inconvenient. She'd seen Evelyn rule in favor of officers when evidence supported their actions and against them when it didn't. That wasn't bias. It was justice. Now they were trying to erase that record, replace it with their own version. Already, social media was filling with selectively edited clips of Evelyn's aggressive questioning of police witnesses. Comment sections overflowed with people questioning how such an obviously unstable person had been allowed to serve as a judge. The sun was setting when Lydia finally stood, gathering her belongings. She slipped her notebook into her bag, along with several backup drives containing her digital records. As she walked through the courthouse halls, screens everywhere continued to broadcast the department's narrative. Legal experts questioned Judge Harper's fitness for the bench, pattern of antagonistic behavior toward law enforcement. Sources suggest possible personal grievances influencing judicial decisions. Lydia clutched her bag closer, feeling the weight of her records inside. She'd spent her career observing, recording, remaining neutral. But neutrality, she realized, wasn't the same as silence. Not when the truth itself was under attack. In her car, she placed her bag carefully on the passenger seat. Through the windshield, she could see the courthouse windows glowing with the same news broadcasts, the same carefully crafted story playing over and over. But in her notebooks and drives, a different story waited. The real story, documented word by word, day by day. They might control the airwaves, but they couldn't erase every record. Not as long as someone remembered the truth. Not as long as someone was willing to protect it. Night crept over the city as Malcolm Price sat hunched over his desk, surrounded by stacks of case files. His tie hung loose around his neck, and empty coffee cups littered the surface between mountains of paperwork. The wall clock ticked past 9 p.m., but he barely noticed. "There has to be more here," he muttered, flipping through another ruling. His eyes burned from hours of reading, but something kept nagging at him, a pattern just below the surface. He grabbed a legal pad and started making notes. Cases involving officers Rourke and Haskins kept appearing. At first glance, they seemed random, spread across different years, different types of incidents. But as Malcolm charted them chronologically, a clearer picture emerged. 3 years ago, Evelyn had ruled against Rourke in an excessive force complaint, demanding he undergo additional training. 2 years ago, she'd questioned Haskins's testimony in a drug possession case, ultimately throwing out evidence due to procedural violations. Last year, both officers had been involved in a controversial arrest where Evelyn ordered an internal investigation. Malcolm circled dates, drew connecting lines. Each ruling showed Evelyn's characteristic thoroughness, detailed analysis, careful consideration of evidence. But they also showed something else, a consistent refusal to accept police testimony without supporting proof. "This isn't bias," Malcolm said to himself, standing to pace his office. "This is accountability." His phone buzzed. A text from Lydia Grant. "Found something. Need to talk." Across town, Lydia sat at her kitchen table. Official court transcripts spread before her. Her personal notebooks lay open beside them, filled with her precise shorthand. A small desk lamp cast just enough light to work by, leaving the rest of her apartment in shadows. She'd been comparing records for hours and the differences were stark. The official transcript of today's arrest had already been altered. Subtle changes in wording, omitted exchanges, modified timing. But her personal notes captured everything. Rourke's exact words when they entered: "Time to learn your place, Your Honor." The official record changed it to, "Please step down, Your Honor." The warrant number Haskins had presented, KP 47891, a number that, according to her decades of experience, didn't match any legitimate court filing system. Her phone rang. "Malcolm, tell me what you found," he said without preamble. "They're sanitizing the record," Lydia replied, her voice tight. "I'm looking at the official transcript right now. They've already changed key details about the arrest. Can you prove the differences? I have my original notes, and—" She hesitated. "I've been keeping separate records, audio backups. It's not exactly protocol, but after years of seeing things disappear—" "We need those records," Malcolm said. "All of them. I'm finding patterns in Evelyn's rulings that might explain why they targeted her. The Rourke and Haskins cases? You noticed those, too? I've recorded every one of their appearances in her courtroom. Their behavior was always aggressive, especially after she started requiring body cam footage to support their testimony." Malcolm grabbed a fresh legal pad. "Tell me everything you remember about their cases." For the next hour, they pieced together a timeline. Lydia's perfect recall filled in crucial details. The growing tension in Rourke's voice each time Evelyn questioned him. Haskins's subtle attempts to intimidate witnesses. The increasing frequency of their appearances in cases that seemed designed to test Evelyn's responses. It wasn't just random, Malcolm realized. They were building a narrative, creating a record they could use against her. "But why now?" Lydia asked. "Why make their move today?" Malcolm shuffled through his files until he found what he was looking for: a pending case summary. Because next week, she was scheduled to hear evidence in a class action lawsuit. Multiple plaintiffs claiming systematic abuse of power by specific officers within the department. Let me guess, Rourke and Haskins? Among others. But here's what's interesting. The case file lists Chief Briggs as having direct oversight during the period in question. Lydia's sharp intake of breath carried clearly over the phone. That explains his presence in the courtroom today. He was watching to make sure it happened. Malcolm checked his watch. Nearly midnight. Visiting hours at the detention center would be over, but he had arranged for emergency contact privileges as Evelyn's attorney. "I need to call her," he said. "This goes deeper than we thought." "Be careful," Lydia warned. "They'll be monitoring everything." "I know, but she needs to understand what we're dealing with." He dialed the detention center's number, went through the verification process, and waited while they connected him to Evelyn's cell. "Malcolm." Her voice was tired but steady. "I've been reviewing your cases," he said carefully, aware of the recording system, "particularly those involving our friends from this morning. I assumed you would." "This wasn't spontaneous, Evelyn. They've been laying groundwork for months, maybe years. Every time you demanded evidence, every time you questioned testimony, every time you insisted on proper procedure, they were building their case. To remove me before the class action hearing," she finished. "I had wondered about the timing. It's bigger than that. The pattern of cases, the altered records, the involvement of senior officials. This isn't just about stopping one lawsuit. I think we've stumbled onto something systematic, something they're desperate to keep hidden." Silence stretched for a moment. When Evelyn spoke again, her voice was low but determined. "Then we need to expose it all. Not just clear my name, but bring everything into the light." "It'll be dangerous," Malcolm warned. "They're already controlling the narrative, manipulating records." "But they can't control everything," Evelyn said. "And they've made one serious miscalculation." "What's that?" "They thought arresting me would silence me. Instead, They've given me nothing but time to think about every case, every detail, every connection. And Malcolm? Yes? I remember everything. The line clicked. Their allotted time was up. Malcolm sat back in his chair, surrounded by files and notes. Evidence of corruption spread across his desk. He thought of Lydia's secret records, Evelyn's perfect memory, his own growing file of connections. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as two investigators led Evelyn into the sterile interrogation room. Her orange jumpsuit felt coarse against her skin, a deliberate reminder of her new status. The metal chair scraped against concrete as she sat down, her handcuffs clinking against the table. Investigator Sarah Mills, a sharp-featured woman in her 40s, placed a thick folder on the table. Her partner, Detective Robert Walsh, a heavy-set man with thinning hair, leaned against the wall behind Evelyn. "Judge Harper," Mills began, her tone professionally cold. "Or should I just say Ms. Harper now?" Evelyn's face remained neutral. "Judge Harper is still correct, investigator. Administrative leave doesn't change my title." Walsh snorted. "Pretty sure getting arrested in your own courtroom changes things. Being arrested under false pretenses doesn't change facts either," Evelyn replied evenly. She sat straight-backed, hands folded on the table, as composed as if she were still on the bench. Mills opened the folder, spreading out documents. "Let's talk about your pattern of anti-police bias. Over the past 3 years, you've ruled against department testimony in 70% of contested cases." "I ruled based on evidence," Evelyn corrected. "Or, more accurately, the lack thereof. Would you like me to cite specific cases? How about the Thompson arrest last month?" Walsh pushed off the wall, towering over her. "Officers Rourke and Haskins provided clear testimony. They provided testimony that contradicted their own body camera footage," Evelyn cut in. "Page 37 of my ruling details the 16 discrepancies. Would you like me to enumerate them?" Mills slapped another document down. "You've consistently undermined police credibility." "I've consistently required evidence beyond verbal testimony," Evelyn said. "The same standard I apply to all witnesses. The law doesn't grant special privileges to officers of the court." Across town, Malcolm stood at a courthouse counter, frustration evident in his tight jaw. The clerk, a young man who couldn't meet his eyes, kept shaking his head. "What do you mean you can't locate the Thompson case files?" Malcolm demanded. "They were just used in court last month." "System shows they're checked out for review," the clerk mumbled. "By whom?" "I'm not authorized to provide that information." Malcolm pulled out another form. "Fine. The warrant from yesterday's arrest. I need to verify the filing number." "That's also unavailable." "Of course it is." Malcolm's voice dripped sarcasm. "And Judge Harper's last 6 months of rulings?" The clerk's face reddened. "Currently being digitized." "All of them? Simultaneously?" Malcolm leaned forward. "Look, I know you're just following orders, but someone's orchestrating this, and it's going to come out. Do you want to be on record as helping them?" The clerk glanced nervously at his supervisor's office before whispering, "Come back after 4. Jenkins takes a late lunch. I'll have 15 minutes alone at the files." Meanwhile, in the courthouse transcription office, Lydia sat at her desk, trying to focus on current cases while ignoring the whispers around her. Her colleagues gave her a wide berth, as if her proximity to yesterday's events might be contagious. Her supervisor, Dan Matthews, appeared at her desk. "Lydia, let's talk about your workload." She looked up, noting his forced, casual tone. "Is there a problem?" "Given recent events, we think it's best to reassign you from Judge Harper's cases. Administrative cleanup, you understand? All 20 years of them?" Lydia kept her voice steady. "We need someone uninvolved to review the records." "Uninvolved," she repeated. "You mean someone who won't notice if things change?" Matthews lowered his voice. Don't make this difficult, Lydia. You're close to retirement. Would be a shame to lose your pension over misplaced loyalty. Back in the interrogation room, Mills laid out photographs, surveillance shots of Evelyn leaving the courthouse on various days. You've had multiple meetings with known police reform activists, Mills accused. I've had meetings with constituents, lawyers, and community leaders, Evelyn corrected. All properly documented and entirely appropriate for a judge handling public interest cases. Walsh slammed his hand on the table. You've been working to undermine this department. Evelyn didn't flinch. I've been working to uphold the law. If that feels like undermining to you, perhaps you should examine why. You really don't get it, do you? Mills leaned forward. This can go two ways. Admit to showing bias, agree to step down quietly, and this ends quickly. Or you'll continue fabricating charges. Evelyn met her gaze. Tell me, investigator, does Officer Rourke often provide you with falsified warrants? Or was yesterday special? Walsh grabbed Evelyn's shoulder. Listen here. Remove your hand, Evelyn said quietly. Or explain to your superiors why you physically intimidated a judge during a recorded interview. Walsh jerked back as if burned, glancing at the observation mirror. Now, Evelyn continued, since you have nothing legitimate to charge me with, I'd like to return to my cell. Unless you'd care to explain why Chief Briggs ordered this arrest before the warrant was even generated. Mills's face tightened. We're done here. She gathered her files quickly, avoiding eye contact. As guards led Evelyn back through the cold corridors, she mentally catalogued every detail, every face, every document, every implied threat. The system she'd served for decades was now actively working to destroy her. Each locked door they passed, each guard who looked away, reinforced the reality of her situation. They reached her cell. The door clanged shut behind her, the sound echoing with finality. Evelyn sat on the thin mattress, her back straight, her expression unchanged. Let them think they had her trapped. Let them believe the cell would break her spirit. They didn't understand. Every false charge, every missing document, every attempt at intimidation. They weren't just attacking her. They were proving her right. And she would remember all of it. Malcolm's fingers drummed against his desk as the courthouse security footage played on his laptop. The timestamp read 9:47 a.m., 13 minutes before Evelyn's arrest. On screen, Officers Rourke and Haskins entered through a side door, not the main entrance they'd claimed in their report. Got you, Malcolm muttered, leaning closer. He watched as the officers huddled near the stairwell, checking their phones repeatedly. Their body language was tense, expectant, not the casual demeanor of officers responding to a sudden situation. The video showed Haskins answering a call at 9:52 a.m., 8 minutes before they burst into the courtroom. 8 minutes they'd sworn under oath they'd spent responding to an emergency tip about judicial misconduct. Malcolm reached for his phone, dialing the public defender's office. Sarah, I need an emergency hearing. I've got footage that proves Officers Rourke and Haskins lied about their timeline. He clicked through more footage as Sarah checked the court schedule. The camera angles caught Rourke and Haskins moving with purpose, not urgency. They weren't rushing to stop a crime in progress. They were executing a plan. 2 o'clock tomorrow morning with Judge Matthews, Sarah said. That's the best I can do. I'll take it. Malcolm was already gathering his files. Send me the confirmation. He drove straight to the detention center, requesting an immediate meeting with Evelyn. The visitation room was cold and sterile, but Evelyn entered with the same dignity she showed on the bench. Her orange jumpsuit couldn't diminish her presence. I have something, Malcolm said without preamble, spreading still frames from the footage across the table. They lied about why they were there. Evelyn studied the images, her expression careful. The timestamp conflicts with their statement. They claimed they received an emergency tip at 9:54 a.m. about you destroying evidence. Said they rushed straight to the courtroom. Malcolm tapped the photos. But here they are, 8 minutes earlier, clearly waiting for something. Or someone, Evelyn added quietly. Notice how they keep checking their phones? They were waiting for a signal. Malcolm nodded. I've got a hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning. Judge Matthews. Eleanor Matthews? A slight frown creased Evelyn's brow. She's traditionally pro-law enforcement. But she's fair, Malcolm countered. And she hates being lied to. These officers filed false statements under oath. That'll matter to her. For the first time since her arrest, Evelyn allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. It must have shone in her eyes because Malcolm reached across the table, squeezing her hand briefly. We're not done, he assured her. I've got reporters asking questions now. People are noticing the inconsistencies. Outside the detention center, a small group of protesters had gathered. Their signs demanded justice, questioned the arrest's timing. Local news vans idled nearby, cameras rolling as community leaders gave interviews. This arrest was a deliberate attempt to silence a voice of accountability. Reverend James Turner told Channel 7 News, Judge Harper has a decades-long record of fairness. The timing of these charges, right as she was ruling on police misconduct, should concern every citizen. Social media buzzed with courthouse staff coming forward anonymously, describing the aggressive way the officers had stormed in. Legal experts questioned the validity of arresting a sitting judge during proceedings. The narrative was shifting, if only slightly. Back in his office, Malcolm prepared his motion. The surveillance footage played on a loop on his second monitor as he typed. Each viewing revealed new details. The way Haskins kept looking toward the executive offices. How Rourke positioned himself to be seen by specific cameras. His phone buzzed with a text from Lydia. Check your email. Sent you something interesting. Malcolm opened his inbox to find audio files, recordings from the courtroom's backup system. He plugged in his headphones and listened. Behind the main audio track, barely audible, was Rourke's voice just before they grabbed Evelyn. Right on schedule. Malcolm added the audio files to his evidence list. The pieces were coming together, forming a picture of premeditation. But he knew from experience that evidence alone wasn't enough. They needed to shift public perception. He called in favors from journalist contacts, providing selected clips that highlighted the contradictions. By evening, social media was dissecting every frame, every timestamp. Questions multiplied. Why were the officers there early? Who were they calling? Why didn't they follow standard arrest protocols? The detention center's evening shift brought Evelyn a stack of messages from supporters. She read each one carefully, noting names, remembering faces from her courtroom. The system might be against her, but she wasn't alone. Malcolm worked late into the night, refining his argument. The hearing would be brief. Preliminary hearings usually were. But it was their first real chance to challenge the arrest's legitimacy. He couldn't waste it. At midnight, his phone lit up with a news alert. A local blog had published an interview with a courthouse janitor who overheard Rourke and Haskins discussing taking care of the judge problem, days before the arrest. The story was gaining traction. Morning approached. Malcolm rehearsed his presentation, anticipating counter-arguments. The surveillance footage played one final time, each damning frame another crack in the officer's story. His phone buzzed, a message from Judge Matthews's clerk, confirming the 9 a.m. hearing. Malcolm gathered his files, checked his evidence one last time. In a few hours, they'd have their first real chance to fight back. Across town, in her cell, Evelyn lay awake, mentally reviewing everything that had happened. The hope she felt was cautious, tempered by experience, but it was there, growing stronger with each passing hour. Tomorrow would bring their first test, a chance to show that truth could still matter in a system designed to suppress it. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Malcolm set up his laptop at the defense table. Judge Matthews peered down from the bench, her face unreadable. Behind him, every seat was filled. Reporters, court staff, and curious onlookers packed shoulder to shoulder. Evelyn sat beside Malcolm, her orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the dark suits around her. She held her head high, but exhaustion shadowed her eyes after days in detention. Officer Rourke and Haskins lounged at the prosecution table, radiating smugness. District Attorney Wilson shuffled papers beside them, occasionally leaning over to whisper in Rourke's ear. "Your Honor," Malcolm began, standing. "We have surveillance footage that directly contradicts the officers' sworn statements about their actions prior to Judge Harper's arrest." Wilson shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. The defense failed to properly submit this evidence through appropriate channels. We weren't given adequate time to review." "The footage was only obtained yesterday," Malcolm countered. "Given the circumstances." "Which doesn't negate proper procedure," Wilson interrupted. "Furthermore, we have serious concerns about chain of custody. This footage wasn't obtained through official channels." Judge Matthews frowned. "Mr. Price, did you follow standard evidence submission protocols?" Malcolm's jaw tightened. "Given the time constraints and the urgent nature—" "That's a no," Matthews cut in. "Motion to present surveillance footage is denied due to procedural non-compliance." Rourke's smirk widened. Evelyn's hands clasped tighter in her lap, but her expression remained neutral. "Your Honor," Malcolm pressed, "the content of this footage proves premeditation." "Counsel, I've made my ruling." Matthews's tone was final. "Move on." Malcolm took a steadying breath. "Then I'd like to call Lydia Grant, the court reporter present during Judge Harper's arrest." Lydia approached the stand, her steps measured. She'd worn her best suit, her gray hair neatly pinned back. After being sworn in, she sat rigidly, hands folded. "Ms. Grant, please read from your transcript of the events immediately preceding Judge Harper's arrest," Malcolm requested. Lydia opened the official transcript, then froze. Her eyes widened slightly as she scanned the page. This isn't correct." "What do you mean?" Malcolm asked. "These aren't my original notes." Lydia flipped through pages frantically. "The timing is wrong. Several exchanges are missing." Wilson stood again. "Your Honor, if the witness is suggesting tampering with official court documents, that's a serious allegation requiring proof." "I kept my own records," Lydia began. "Unofficial records have no standing," Wilson dismissed. "The official transcript is the only admissible version." Judge Matthews nodded. "The official transcript stands. Ms. Grant, you're dismissed." Lydia's hands shook as she left the stand. In the gallery, several courthouse staff avoided her gaze. "The prosecution calls James Martinez," Wilson announced. A man in his 40s approached the stand. His suit was expensive, his manner confident. Malcolm frowned. This witness hadn't been on any previous lists. "Mr. Martinez, what is your occupation?" Wilson asked. "I'm a court clerk in Judge Harper's division." "And what did you witness on March 15th, 3 days before Judge Harper's arrest?" Martinez leaned forward. "I saw Judge Harper removing files from the evidence room after hours. When she noticed me, she seemed startled and quickly left." Evelyn stiffened. Malcolm stood. "Objection! This witness wasn't disclosed." "Due to concerns for his safety," Wilson smoothly interrupted. "Mr. Martinez only came forward yesterday after receiving protective assurances." Judge Matthews overruled the objection. Martinez continued spinning his tale, describing multiple instances of suspicious behavior. Each detail was carefully crafted to seem plausible while being impossible to immediately disprove. "She said the system needed correction," Martinez claimed, "that some evidence shouldn't see the light of day." Evelyn's face remained composed, but her fingers dug into her palms. She'd never met this man. never had these conversations, but his performance was convincing, his lies wrapped in just enough truth to sound credible. After an hour of testimony, Judge Matthews cleared her throat. Given the evidence presented, including testimony from a court officer witnessing suspicious behavior, I find probable cause to proceed with charges. She shuffled papers on her bench. Furthermore, in light of these serious allegations, I am issuing an immediate order for Judge Harper's removal from the bench pending full investigation. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Malcolm started to object, but Matthews raised her hand. My decision is final. Bailiff, please escort the defendant out. Evelyn stood slowly, dignity intact despite the crushing weight of the moment. Her gaze swept the courtroom, past Rourke's triumphant grin, past Martinez's satisfied smirk, past the shocked faces of colleagues she'd worked with for years. She paused at the gallery gate, where her robe had once commanded respect. Now she stood exposed in detention orange, watching decades of service crumble under carefully constructed lies. The bailiff touched her elbow gently. Ma'am? Evelyn nodded once and allowed herself to be led out. Her steps were steady, her head high, but each footfall felt like another nail in the coffin of her career. Behind her, Wilson was already speaking to reporters. This demonstrates that no one is above the law, he declared. The evidence speaks for itself. The heavy courtroom doors swung shut behind her, cutting off the voices, the whispers, the sound of justice being twisted. In the quiet hallway, Evelyn finally allowed her shoulders to drop slightly. But her eyes remained clear, her jaw set. They had taken her robe, her position, her authority. But they hadn't taken her determination. Not yet. The bailiff gestured toward the detention area. Evelyn straightened her spine and walked forward. Each step was an act of defiance, measured, deliberate, unbroken. Malcolm slumped in his office chair, tie loosened, staring at the motion that had just been denied. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the blinds, highlighting the scattered papers across his desk. His phone buzzed, another reporter wanting comment on Evelyn's removal from the bench. A soft knock at his door made him look up. Lydia Grant stood in the doorway, clutching her worn leather bag like a shield. "Can I come in?" she asked, glancing nervously down the hallway. Malcolm straightened. "Of course." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Close the door behind you." Lydia settled into the chair, her movements careful and deliberate. She placed her bag in her lap, hands still gripping the straps tightly. "I shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "They're watching everyone who might help Judge Harper." I noticed. That transcript swap wasn't subtle. Malcolm's jaw tightened. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore." Lydia took a deep breath. "That's why I came. There's something you need to know." She reached into her bag, removing an old digital recorder and several USB drives. "I've been keeping my own records for years." Malcolm leaned forward. "What kind of records?" "Audio recordings, independent of the court system." Her fingers traced the recorder's worn edges. "When I started as a court reporter 30 years ago, I learned quickly that official transcripts could change. Important details would vanish. So I started backing everything up." She placed the items on his desk. "I have recordings from every significant case in Judge Harper's courtroom, including the day of her arrest." Malcolm stared at the devices, hardly daring to breathe. "These are unauthorized recordings." "Yes." Lydia's voice was firm despite her obvious nervousness. "But they're accurate, and they prove the official transcript was altered." Malcolm picked up one of the drives. "How detailed are these recordings?" "Everything." The warrant numbers Rourke and Haskins claimed. Their exact words when they entered. The timing. She paused. And conversations they didn't know were being captured. "What do you mean?" "My equipment was still running after they cleared the courtroom. It picked up Rourke bragging to Haskins about how they'd finally shut her up. Lydia's hands trembled slightly. They mentioned Chief Briggs by name. Said everything was going according to plan. Malcolm grabbed a legal pad. Tell me exactly what you heard. Word for word. As Lydia recounted the details, Malcolm's pen flew across the page. The recording captured Rourke and Haskins discussing the fake warrant numbers, laughing about how easy it was to alter documents when the chief has your back. They'd even mentioned specific cases Evelyn had ruled on, cases where evidence had mysteriously disappeared. There's more, Lydia continued. Remember Martinez, the surprise witness? She pulled out another drive. He's never worked in Judge Harper's division. I have 3 years of morning staff meetings recorded. He's not in a single one. Malcolm's eyes widened. They planted a completely fake witness? They got sloppy. Lydia's voice hardened. They didn't think anyone would have proof. Malcolm began organizing the drives. We'll need to authenticate these recordings, prove they haven't been tampered with. I thought of that. Lydia pulled out a notebook filled with meticulous notes. I've documented every recording, date, time, equipment used. The recorder itself has internal timestamps that can't be altered, and I have the original memory cards stored separately. You've been preparing for something like this. I've watched too many good people get crushed by this system. Her voice caught slightly. Judge Harper was different. She actually tried to fix things. That's why they came after her. Malcolm stood, pacing as his mind raced through possibilities. We'll need expert witnesses to verify the audio. Someone to confirm Martinez's employment records. And we have to move fast. They'll try to block this evidence too. I have copies, Lydia assured him. Multiple copies, stored in different places. They can't make these disappear. Malcolm paused, studying her. You understand what you're risking? Your job, possibly criminal charges for unauthorized recording. I understand. Lydia met his gaze steadily. I've spent my career watching silently. Not anymore. Malcolm nodded, respect evident in his expression. He pulled out a fresh legal pad. Let's go through everything systematically. Start with the arrest day recordings. We need to document every inconsistency with the official transcript. Lydia opened her notebook. The first discrepancy appears 12 minutes before they entered. Rourke's radio transmission proves he was already in the building, not responding to an emergency call like he claimed. For the next hour, they pieced together the truth the recordings revealed. Each detail strengthened the pattern of corruption. The warrant numbers were traceable to blank forms that had disappeared from evidence storage. The timing of radio calls showed coordination with someone high in the department. Even the background conversations captured snippets of a larger conspiracy. We need to be strategic about how we use this, Malcolm said, reviewing his notes. The moment they realize these recordings exist, they'll throw everything they have at discrediting them. Start with Martinez, Lydia suggested. Proving he lied under oath would shake their whole case. Malcolm nodded, making more notes. Then the warrant discrepancies. Build momentum before we reveal the full scope. He looked up at Lydia. Are you ready for what comes next? Once we file this evidence, there's no going back. Lydia squared her shoulders. I've been ready for 30 years. Let's get Judge Harper back on that bench. The office had grown dark, lit only by Malcolm's desk lamp and the glow of his computer screen. Empty coffee cups littered his desk as he sat with headphones on, listening to Lydia's recordings for the 4th time. Rourke's voice crackled through the audio. Chief says she's been poking around those seized asset reports. Time to shut her down. Haskins's calmer tone followed. Everything's arranged. Warrant's ready. Just needs the final touches. Malcolm paused the playback, making another note on his legal pad. The timestamp read 8:47 a.m., nearly 2 hours before they'd stormed into Evelyn's courtroom. Their claims of responding to an emergency complaint were falling apart with each replay. He pulled up financial records on his screen, cross-referencing dates. The seized asset reports Rourke mentioned weren't just random files. They connected to a series of drug busts where evidence had vanished, cases that had crossed Evelyn's desk. "Follow the money," Malcolm muttered, clicking through spreadsheets. Department records showed unusual patterns in asset forfeitures. Cars, cash, property, all logged then mysteriously revalued or disappeared entirely. His phone buzzed. A text from his forensic accountant. "Found something. Check account. Varu 847392. Multiple deposits coincide with dismissed cases." Malcolm pulled up the account records. His eyes widened. Regular deposits, always just under reporting thresholds, flowing into an offshore account. The names on the transfers were shell companies, but the dates aligned perfectly with cases Evelyn had been investigating before her arrest, prompting Malcolm to grab a fresh legal pad and draw connections between events. March 15th, Evelyn questions missing evidence in the Rodriguez case. March 16th, a $9,800 deposit appears in an offshore account. March 17th, the Rodriguez case is mysteriously dismissed. March 18th, seized vehicles are accidentally released to unknown parties. The pattern repeated at least a dozen times. Each instance involved cases Rourke and Haskins had worked on, cases where Evelyn had started asking uncomfortable questions. Malcolm turned back to the audio. Later segments captured hallway conversations between the officers after the arrest. "She should have stayed in her lane," Rourke's voice sneered, "getting too close to the chief's special arrangements." "Keep it down," Haskins warned. "Just stick to the story. Judicial misconduct, tampering with evidence. Simple. Simple's good, long as the paperwork holds up like you promised." Malcolm's pen pressed hard against the paper as he transcribed. Their arrogance was stunning. They hadn't bothered checking for recording devices, confident in their power to control the narrative. He pulled out his phone, dialing his investigator. "Dave, I need everything you can find on Chief Briggs's financial records. Focus on any connections to these shell companies." He read off the account numbers. While waiting, Malcolm reviewed Lydia's notes on the fake witness, Martinez. His employment records were a mess of contradictions. Dates that didn't match, signatures from supervisors who weren't even working those days. They'd fabricated his entire court security background. His computer chimed. New email from Dave. Malcolm clicked it open, scanning quickly. His breath caught. Chief Briggs had a pattern too. Regular meetings with private security firms that won contracts after drug busts. Properties seized in raids, ending up owned by companies linked to his brother-in-law. Everything carefully hidden behind layers of paperwork. But the connections were there. The pieces locked together. This wasn't just about silencing Evelyn. She'd stumbled onto an entire network of corruption, with Briggs at the center. Rourke and Haskins were merely enforcers, ensuring no one looked too closely at the money flowing through their department. As Malcolm began organizing the evidence into a clear timeline, financial trails revealing illegal profits from seized assets, audio proving the arrest was a planned act of retaliation, documented patterns of evidence tampering, proof of witness fabrication, and direct links between dismissed cases and suspicious deposits. His phone buzzed again. Dave had more. Found property records. Chief's wife suddenly very wealthy. Multiple houses bought cash through LLCs. Malcolm added it to his notes. The case was transforming. This wasn't just defending Evelyn anymore. This was exposing systematic corruption at the highest levels. He checked the time, 11:42 p.m. The courthouse would accept emergency filings until midnight. Barely enough time, but it had to be tonight. Every hour Evelyn spent stripped of her position was another hour they had to cover their tracks. Malcolm began drafting the emergency motion, fingers flying across his keyboard. He detailed the new evidence, emphasizing the immediate need to address witness perjury and document falsification. The audio recordings provided clear probable cause for a broader investigation. He included just enough financial details to show the scale of corruption without revealing everything. Let them worry about what else he might have found. Their paranoia would work against them. 11:53 p.m. Malcolm gathered the files, double-checking his exhibits. The motion had to be perfect. No procedural errors they could use to delay things. He grabbed his coat, documents tucked securely in his briefcase. The night clerk would be expecting him. He'd called ahead to ensure someone would be there to accept the filing. As he locked his office, Malcolm thought of Evelyn, still facing charges while corrupt officials walked free. That would end tomorrow. The same system they'd used to attack her would become the weapon that exposed their crimes. He checked his watch again. 11:57 p.m. Just enough time to make it. The emergency hearing would force them to address the evidence immediately. No time for their usual delays and diversions. The elevator seemed painfully slow as it descended to the parking garage. Malcolm mentally rehearsed his arguments, anticipating their counter-moves. They'd try to block the recordings, claim privacy violations. He had precedents ready for every objection. Racing through empty streets toward the courthouse, Malcolm allowed himself a grim smile. They thought they'd silenced Evelyn. Instead, they'd given her allies the perfect opportunity to tear their whole corrupt system apart. The morning sun streamed through the tall courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the packed gallery. Every seat was filled, with people standing along the walls. The air felt thick with tension as Malcolm approached the podium, his briefcase heavy with evidence that would shatter carefully constructed lies. Judge Williams, a stern woman in her 60s, looked down from the bench. "Mr. Price, you called this emergency hearing, claiming new evidence. Proceed." Malcolm nodded, setting up a small speaker system. "Your Honor, what you're about to hear was recorded the morning of Judge Harper's arrest." Chief Briggs shifted in his seat near the front row. Rourke and Haskins sat behind their attorney, their usual confidence wavering slightly as they watched Malcolm connect the audio equipment. The first recording played, Rourke's voice filling the silent room. "Chief says she's been poking around those seized asset reports. Time to shut her down." Haskins's response followed. "Everything's arranged. Warrants ready. Just needs the final touches." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Malcolm paused the playback. This conversation took place at 8:47 a.m., nearly 2 hours before Judge Harper's arrest. Their claim of responding to an emergency complaint is demonstrably false. The defense attorney shot to his feet. "Objection! We have no way to verify when this recording was made." "If I may, Your Honor." Malcolm pulled out a thick folder. "I have here the original metadata and verification from 2 independent audio forensics experts confirming the timestamp and authenticity." Judge Williams reviewed the documents carefully. "Objection overruled. Continue, Mr. Price." Malcolm played more segments. Each clip revealed deeper layers of premeditation. Rourke and Haskins discussed forging documents, planting evidence, coordinating with others to alter records. The gallery's whispers grew louder. Officer Rourke's face had turned red. Haskins stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. "But the audio evidence is just the beginning," Malcolm continued. He projected financial records onto the courtroom's screen. "These bank records show regular deposits into offshore accounts, all carefully structured to avoid detection." He highlighted specific transactions. "Note the dates. Each deposit corresponds to cases Judge Harper was investigating, cases involving seized assets that mysteriously disappeared or were severely undervalued." The defense attorney tried again. "Your Honor, these financial records weren't part of the original filing. They became relevant when your client's recorded conversations mentioned seized asset reports," Malcolm countered. which led us to discover this pattern of financial irregularities. Judge Williams leaned forward. I'll allow it. These documents appear properly authenticated. Malcolm displayed more evidence: property records, shell company filings, transfer documents with signatures that didn't match official records. The web of corruption grew clearer with each exhibit. The warrant used to arrest Judge Harper? Malcolm held up the document. I had our forensics team analyze the paper and ink. It was created the morning of the arrest, but backdated. The authorization code doesn't exist in the court's system. Chief Briggs's calm facade cracked slightly. He whispered urgently to his attorney. Malcolm played another recording. She should have stayed in her lane, getting too close to the chief's special arrangements. The courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned to Chief Briggs. We've also discovered, Malcolm continued, his voice steady, that properties seized in drug raids were systematically transferred to companies owned by Chief Briggs's family members through a series of shell corporations. He displayed a complex chart showing the connections. Over $5 million in assets moved through this network in the past year alone. Judge Harper began noticing discrepancies in the documentation. 1 week later, she was arrested. The defense attorneys huddled together, papers rustling as they whispered frantically. Rourke and Haskins avoided looking at each other or their chief. Malcolm projected one final document. This is the witness statement from Officer Martinez, claiming he saw Judge Harper tampering with evidence. He paused for effect. Officer Martinez wasn't employed by the court during the dates he claimed to be present. His entire background was fabricated. A gasp ran through the gallery. Judge Williams's expression hardened as she studied the proof of perjury. Your Honor, Malcolm's voice carried clearly through the stunned courtroom. These officers didn't just falsely arrest a sitting judge. They're part of a larger conspiracy to conceal systematic corruption. Judge Harper was targeted because she discovered their scheme. He gestured to the evidence displayed around him. The recordings prove premeditation. The financial records show motive. The forged documents and false witness demonstrate consciousness of guilt. This wasn't a legitimate arrest. It was a calculated attack on someone who threatened to expose the truth. Chief Briggs stood abruptly, heading for the door. 2 federal agents, who had been waiting near the entrance, stepped forward, blocking his path. The defense attorneys were now openly arguing among themselves. Rourke's face had gone from red to pale. Haskins stared at his hands, all pretense of confidence gone. Judge Williams rapped her gavel sharply. Order! The room fell silent again. Mr. Price, this evidence suggests serious criminal conduct extending well beyond the current matter. Yes, Your Honor, Malcolm agreed. We're prepared to provide all documentation to the federal investigators already waiting outside. The gallery erupted in shocked conversations. The carefully constructed narrative that had painted Judge Harper as corrupt was crumbling, revealing the real corruption beneath. Judge Williams raised her voice over the noise. Given the nature of this evidence, I am immediately vacating all charges against Judge Harper. Furthermore, she fixed a stern gaze on the officers and their chief. I am referring this matter to the U.S. Attorney's Office for immediate investigation. The room buzzed with tension and disbelief. Reporters rushed out to file updates. The officers' supporters, who had filled the front rows at previous hearings, now moved away from them as if distance could provide deniability. The truth that had been buried under layers of lies and intimidation now lay exposed in the harsh light of justice. The courtroom crackled with tension as the final audio recording faded into silence. Judge Williams's stern expression had transformed into one of barely contained outrage. Around the room, federal agents positioned themselves strategically near the exits, while court officers exchanged meaningful glances. In light of this overwhelming evidence, Judge Williams declared, her voice cutting through the stunned silence, this court has no choice. but to take immediate action. She straightened in her chair, authority radiating from every movement. "Court officers, take Officers Rourke and Haskins into custody. Now." Two uniformed court officers moved swiftly toward the defendant's table. The sharp sound of their footsteps echoed through the chamber as they approached. Rourke and Haskins sat frozen, their faces draining of color as the reality of their situation crashed down around them. Rourke suddenly jumped to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous!" His voice boomed too loud, desperate and hollow. "You can't just—" "Officer Rourke," Judge Williams cut in, her tone sharp as steel. "You will be silent, or you will be held in contempt. Court officers, proceed." The first officer reached for Rourke's arm. For a moment, it seemed Rourke might resist, his muscles tensed, jaw clenched. But the fight drained from him as quickly as it had appeared. His shoulders slumped as cold metal handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Beside him, Haskins remained seated, his expression carefully blank. His eyes darted around the room, analyzing angles, seeking escape routes, finding none. When the second officer approached him, he stood smoothly, offering his wrists without comment. But the slight tremor in his hands betrayed his composure. Chief Briggs rose from his seat, adjusting his tie with practiced calm. "Your Honor, if I may address the court?" His polished tone carried none of the desperation visible in the slight sheen of sweat on his forehead. "I want to express my shock at these revelations. Had I any knowledge of my officer's actions—" "Save it, Chief," Malcolm interrupted, pulling another document from his briefcase. "Exhibit 27, Your Honor. Email correspondence between Chief Briggs and Officer Haskins discussing the Harper problem and how to handle it permanently." He held up the paper. Dated 3 days before Judge Harper's arrest, sent from the chief's personal email account. Briggs's practiced smile faltered. That could be referring to anything. You're taking it out of context." "The full context is here, Chief," Malcolm continued, his voice steady. "Along with bank records showing transfers from your shell companies to accounts controlled by both officers. Should we discuss those details now, or would you prefer to save that conversation for the federal investigators?" The gallery erupted in shocked whispers. Several reporters scribbled frantically in their notebooks, while others rushed for the doors to file updates. The story was already spreading beyond these walls. Judge Williams raised her gavel. "Order!" The sharp crack silenced the room. "Chief Briggs, approach the bench." Briggs moved forward, his usual confident stride reduced to uncertain steps. Two federal agents followed close behind him. "Leonard Briggs," Judge Williams began, using his first name with clear disdain, "based on the evidence presented, you are hereby remanded into federal custody, pending investigation into conspiracy, corruption, and obstruction of justice." "Your Honor, I have rights," Briggs started. "Yes, you do," Judge Williams cut him off, "and they will be scrupulously observed, unlike how you treated Judge Harper's rights." She nodded to the federal agents. "Take him!" As Briggs was led away, Judge Williams turned her attention to the formal dismissal of charges against Evelyn. "Let the record show that all charges against Judge Evelyn Harper are hereby dismissed with prejudice." Her voice carried the weight of justice finally served. "The record will further reflect that these charges were brought maliciously and without merit, as part of a criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice." Each dismissed charge seemed to lift a weight from the room. Evelyn sat perfectly still, her face a mask of dignified calm as she watched the proceedings. She showed no triumph, no satisfaction, only the patient certainty of someone who had known the truth would eventually surface. The officers who had once dragged her from her own courtroom now shuffled toward the door in restraints, their badges and guns already confiscated. Rourke stared straight ahead, his previous swagger replaced by rigid shock. Haskins kept his head down, already calculating plea deals in his mind. Chief Briggs walked between two federal agents, his carefully maintained image of authority crumbling with each step. His expensive suit, once a symbol of his power, now looked like costly costume jewelry. Flashy, but fundamentally fake. The gallery watched in stunned silence as the three men were led out. The same people who had witnessed Evelyn's humiliation now observed her vindication. Some looked away in shame, remembering their own silence during her arrest. Others nodded in grim satisfaction, particularly those who had endured similar abuses of power. Through it all, Evelyn remained motionless, her hands folded in her lap, her posture straight and dignified. She had maintained her composure through the worst of their attacks, and she maintained it now in her moment of vindication. The only visible change was a slight softening around her eyes as she watched justice finally align with truth. The afternoon sun filtered through the high courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Evelyn Harper stood outside her courtroom, her judicial robe draped carefully over her arm. The fabric felt different now, heavier with meaning, yet somehow lighter with vindication. She traced her fingers over the nameplate beside the door. Judge Evelyn Harper, Courtroom 7A. They hadn't had time to remove it during her absence. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the heavy wooden doors. The familiar creak announced her return, drawing every eye in the packed gallery. Unlike the chaos of this morning, a profound silence filled the space. Court staff, attorneys, and observers rose in unison, not from mere protocol, but with genuine reverence. Malcolm Price sat in the front row of the gallery, his briefcase at his feet. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her a subtle nod. She noticed Lydia Grant at her usual station, her recording equipment ready, her presence a quiet reminder of how truth had prevailed. Evelyn moved deliberately toward the bench, each step measured and purposeful. Her shoes clicked against the floor, the same sound that had echoed through this room countless times before, but now it carried new weight. The robe settled onto her shoulders like armor, its black fabric a statement of restored authority. "All rise," the bailiff called out, though everyone was already standing. The Honorable Judge Evelyn Harper presiding. She took her seat, adjusting the microphone with practiced ease. The leather chair felt unchanged, yet everything else had transformed. The same walls that had witnessed her humiliation now stood witness to her return. "Be seated," she said, her voice clear and steady. The rustling of movement filled the room as people settled into their places. She allowed the moment to breathe, surveying the faces before her. Some showed relief, others embarrassment, and a few displayed lingering uncertainty. "Before we proceed with today's docket," Evelyn began, "there are matters that must be addressed." She opened a folder on her bench, though she hardly needed to reference its contents. "This morning's events have exposed serious failures within our justice system, failures that extend far beyond my personal experience." Her words carried to every corner of the courtroom. No one shuffled papers or whispered to colleagues. Even the usual background noise of the courthouse seemed muted, as if the building itself was listening. "The corruption we witnessed was not born in a day," she continued. "It grew in the shadows of complacency, fed by silence and fear. That ends now." She lifted a document from her desk. "I am implementing immediate changes to court procedures and oversight mechanisms." Malcolm leaned forward slightly, his pen poised over his notepad. He recognized the determination in her tone, the same unwavering resolve that had sustained her through her ordeal. "First," Evelyn announced, "all warrant applications will undergo multi-level review, with mandatory documentation of every individual involved in the process. No single officer, judge, or official will have unilateral power to circumvent these checks." She paused, allowing the significance to settle. Several attorneys in the gallery exchanged glances, recognizing the direct response to how her arrest warrant had been fraudulently processed. Second, this court will establish an independent oversight committee for law enforcement conduct within our jurisdiction. This committee will include civilian representatives, legal experts, and ethics specialists. Their findings will be public record. The scratch of pens and tap of laptop keys filled the brief silence as people recorded her words. Through the window, clouds shifted, changing the pattern of light across the courtroom floor. Third, we will implement new protections for court staff who report misconduct. Her eyes moved briefly to Lydia. Whistleblower safeguards will be strengthened, and anonymous reporting channels will be established with direct access to external investigators. Each directive landed with the weight of stone on water, ripples spreading through the assembled crowd. These weren't mere procedural adjustments. They were fundamental shifts in how power would be checked and balanced. Additionally, Evelyn continued, her voice taking on an even more serious tone, I am ordering a complete review of all cases involving Officers Rourke and Haskins, as well as any decisions influenced by former Chief Briggs. Justice cannot exist alongside corruption, and we must be willing to examine our own failures. She straightened a stack of papers on her bench, the simple action drawing attention to how ordinary moments could carry extraordinary significance. The same hands that had been cuffed hours ago now commanded the full attention of the court. These changes are not punitive, she explained, her tone measured but firm. They are protective of our system, our principles, and most importantly, of justice itself. What happened in this courtroom this morning revealed both the worst and the best of our system. We witnessed how power can be abused, but also how truth, when properly defended, will prevail. Malcolm nodded slowly, pride evident in his expression. He watched as his friend and colleague reclaimed not just her position, but the very principle of justice she had always fought to uphold. We will now proceed with today's cases, Evelyn stated, reaching for the first file on her docket. The routine action carried new meaning. Each case would be heard under these new standards, each decision made with renewed commitment to transparency and fairness. The gallery remained still, absorbing the gravity of the moment. Through the windows, the afternoon light continued to shift, but within the courtroom, something had solidified. A renewed foundation of justice, stronger for having been tested. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.